Not only are they providing eye-watering subsidies to Drax, but last year the UK government made a reckless decision to approve the largest undeveloped oil and gas project in the UK, Rosebank in the North Sea. Burning the oil and gas from this single field would produce over 200 million tonnes of CO2. Put into context, this is more than the annual CO2 emissions of the 28 poorest countries in the global south combined. And in other words, the same as emissions created by 700 million of the world's poorest people across a year. These are people from the same countries that are already experiencing some of the worst impacts of an overheating planet. And they've contributed the least to the climate crisis, but are feeling its lash sooner and harsher because of fossil fuel exploitation by countries like ours. We have a historic responsibility to use our country's wealth to support a fair and just transition, both here and abroad, and pay loss and damage reparations to those same countries we exploited in order to build that wealth. So this climate crisis is a direct consequence of greed. The Norwegian state-owned oil giant behind Rosebank, Equinor, demonstrates this by the obscene amount of profits in their tens of billions reported year after year. And to be clear, the oil extracted from Rosebank is not needed to make for an energy-secure future or lower our energy bills. It will be sold to the highest bidder and exported. So how is the UK government safeguarding the future for everyday people? Rosebank is expected to cost £4.1 billion to develop, and yet Equinor could be handed a taxpayer subsidy worth £3.75 billion through tax breaks and the loophole in the government's windfall tax that spares oil and gas investment. Behind these billions are millions of people living in fuel poverty, many of whom are young children and pensioners. Behind these billions are hundreds of millions of people in the global south who continue to face environmental racism and the devastating impacts of climate breakdown. And behind these billions are countless living beings that are facing extinction. Rosebank's development would see a pipeline laid through a protected area of the North Sea, putting at risk a diverse array of marine life, from delicate coral gardens to rare deep-sea sponges, from clams that lived hundreds of years old to whales and dolphins. It is impossible to fulfil climate obligations set out in the Paris Agreement and to reach net zero while ignoring the impact of burning oil and creating emissions from Rosebank. To be clear, to limit global warming, the safest livable temperature levels, Rosebank and all new fossil fuel investment must be stopped.
Way!
So the basis of these new subsidies is the idea that Drax will develop BECCS, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. And I wanted to talk a little bit about just how dangerous that idea is. It's the idea that by shipping over wood, burning it, you can somehow capture the carbon from the fumes, pipe it under the North Sea and store it permanently. And the idea that you can get energy out of this process and that that will be not even carbon neutral, but negative emissions, taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere as if by magic. But this is a really dangerous myth because it's found its way into global calculations about what we need to do to solve the climate crisis. And this myth is that, you know, as if we were working on a computer, there's an undo button. We can undo all the emissions we're pumping into the atmosphere year on year, and it's a get out of jail free card for the fossil fuel industry, that we don't have to take real action because there's this thing in the future, somewhere down the line, that can be done at scale, and it's called negative emissions, and it's the magic undo button that will solve everything. So we've talked a bit so far about the damage done by Drax and Biofuelwatch, which is just 2 power stations, the forests cut down in Canada, the environmental health and racism of the pellet mills, the forests cut down in the southern US, all that. And that's just, we're just talking about Drax there. But the idea is for bioenergy and carbon capture and storage to happen on a global scale. Now, to be honest, I would say the most likely outcome of all these billions of subsidies being poured into Drax and Vex is that it doesn't actually work in the end. Because quite frankly, what has carbon capture and storage achieved so far? It's carbon capture on a very small scale, and the CO2 has been mostly pumped into oil fields to get out more oil. I mean, the track record is not great for making this technology work. But just imagine it did work. Imagine that you could do this, that you could cut down trees, burn them, capture the carbon and create negative emissions. What sort of scale would we have to do this on? It's actually immense. People have made calculations that say, well, you would have to take up something like 1/3 of global cropland. It's simple maths. This land, it has to be you have to be cutting down ancient woodland, or you have to be displacing farmland, or you have to be displacing communities. We've seen this, as Doug said before, with palm oil. The maths just doesn't add up, and you can't certify these things to be sustainable if there's a big financial demand behind it. This is a really dangerous technology, an idea for so many reasons. And as I said, not least the idea that gives the idea that you can carry on burning fossil fuels and get away with it. We can't. We know that. The other thing I wanted to talk about is all these subsidies that are being given to biomass. What else could we do with them? If we want to subsidise in the UK our energy system, we could subsidise real renewables. Cheaper renewables. The last time they held an auction for getting new offshore wind power, it completely failed because they set the price too low and tried to get it too much on the cheap. And that was a complete disaster and has put offshore wind development back. What about onshore wind? Well, allegedly the government has stopped this block that they had on it, but the result of that, let me think, the last 12 months, I think 2 wind turbines were built. That's not wind farms, that's literally 2 new wind turbines. And there are no new public wind farm planning applications were submitted. So the effective freeze on onshore wind energy is still working very, very well, thank you. And another great thing that you can do if you really want to tackle our energy crisis is stop using so much energy. The cheapest energy is what you don't use. We need to insulate homes, but home insulation is still crawling along, stagnating at 1/10 of what it was in its peak in 2012. While subsidies are being poured into Drax, Rosebank is being given tax breaks, the government is just not willing to spend money to make sure people have warm, well-insulated homes that we desperately need. There's no serious effort either to decarbonise other vital sectors of the economy, like transport and food growing. So, there are so many ways we could spend this money better. There are so many real solutions to tackling climate change, and Drax, despite the greenwash, is not one of them. Biomass is not one of them. BECCS is not one of them. And we all, as people say, need to lobby our MPs and make sure they are absolutely clear about what the facts are and not be blinded by the greenwash. Thank you.
Very timely, as you will have heard, because there was a consultation that closed last week about extending subsidies to biomass generators, Linemouth and Drax. I just want to briefly touch on something about why biomass can never be sustainable in the form in which the UK is choosing to do it. And that's because the way in which we're doing it is turning it into a commodity. We're saying we want as much as we can, we want lots of it, and we want to do it as cheaply as we can, because that's the way the businesses make money. And then we're going to certify it to say it's sustainable. Well, we've tried that before. We've tried that with soy from the Amazon. Did it work? No. We've tried that with palm oil from Indonesia. Did it work? No. We've tried that with fish with the Marine Stewardship Council. Did it work? No. We've even tried that with offsetting, where we try and produce large amounts of forestry plantations to offset carbon emissions that are being emitted from fossil fuels, and say that that makes everything okay. So we've tried kind of making commodities out of offsets, and did that work? So given that history of failure, why would you expect it to work with biomass? And the answer, of course, is it won't. Because the drive behind a commodity process like that is to drive out as much cost as you can and externalise all the costs that you can as well, so that other people, the planet and people, take the rap for your process. And that's what's going on with the process around biomass and with the way the UK is choosing to do this. The costs are being felt by the planet, first of all, in terms of carbon, in terms of biodiversity damage, in terms of forests that will struggle to regrow when they were ancient forests, and also the people. And I was very pleased that my colleagues managed to unearth the issues around environmental racism and the disproportionate impact on people of colour of the pelleting plants in Louisiana. As well as the problems that France has been having, as it were, problems with air pollution compliance, formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, methanol and so on, polluting the air for those communities around their pelleting plants. And so the message I want to leave you with, as well as the excellent things that have been covered by Mary and Olwen about why this does not work, is that it can never work, because we're trying to do it in a way that has failed. And there's no reason to think that the way we're trying to do it can be made better, because the necessary levels of will, finance, regulation, monitoring, verification are streets and streets beyond anything that any political party and any government anywhere in the world is seriously contemplating. It is a dead-end road to nowhere, and it's got to stop. Thank you very much.
Way!
Is from Greenpeace, and he said good, and I think he just meant, it's good to be brief. I don't think he meant good because we don't listen to you. There's only 2 Greens in the House of Lords out of 800 peers, and so we both work on a huge number of topics, and this is one I have been working on for some years, but I rely completely on Biofuelwatch and on Stop Burning Trees for updates. We can't cover all the topics that we cover without campaigns who actually give us really good briefings and bring us up to date all the time. And so I watched that Panorama programme and was absolutely horrified. I brought it up with a minister in the House of Lords, and it didn't get anywhere. And so 7 months later, I brought it up again at oral questions, which is when it's actually public and they have to give public answers. And I said, it's 7 months since that Panorama programme. Your department must have looked at it and actually questioned whether or not all the facts were true, and whether or not you can seriously call biofuels sustainable. And he said, oh well, no, we're it's a sustainable method of energy production, and we're quite happy with it. And I believe our work rather than a few Canadian environmentalists. And I was hopping mad, as I so often am in the House of Lords. And it struck me then that we have a government that simply can't understand
the word sustainable. They cannot understand net zero. They absolutely are incapable of actually preparing us for a future which is going to be incredibly dangerous for the planet and for humankind. And so I would like to say, if there are any Labour voters here, or not, or if you, wherever you vote, if it's what Olwyn said, it was her first demand, that we actually lobby our MPs and lobby them hard about this issue. There's no point in lobbying the peers. Most of them don't have any staff, they're overwhelmed with emails, but MPs, they have staff and they can actually deal with all their constituents who want to lobby them. And so please do that, explain that the climate crisis is happening and that burning trees, ancient trees, is not sustainable, especially and moreover when we're actually shipping it in with dirty ships with dirty fuel. So, thank you very much. I'm dashing back to work, but please, you know, if anybody wants to email me anytime, I do try to answer emails, but a briefing is always amazing. And thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
Way!
And I think it's really important to have these statements because we remember exactly who it is that is being impacted by the subsidies that this department is giving to Drax and Linemouth and other tree burners. So from Dr. Crystal Martin, a long-time campaigner doing brilliant work fighting Drax, where she lives in Mississippi, when you come to subsidise these entities, Drax, you're condoning the dirty job they're doing. You cannot support environmental justice and support these industries at the same time. You're directly contributing to the health issues we see in the community when you support companies like Drax. And then from Mr. Jimmy Brown, another frontline community member, I don't think Drax should be allowed to have any more subsidies and get the opportunity to pollute and make the citizens of Gloucester sick and have to deal with all of these health problems. Put those subsidies into the community and do right by us. It's a simple message. All this money could be used for improving communities for real climate action, not for policing and poisoning them. From Miss Mabel, I've started coughing inside and outside. The plant might be helping people make a living, but we want a clean environment so we can breathe. That's what we need. I had a friend that stayed with me and she died because of the environment that was round here. It was cancer. We need the plant to clean up its act. I think I would feel better if they did. At night, something heavy comes out of that plant. I had to sleep with my ventilator to try and stay alive. I'm 83, I have to do a lot to myself to sleep. From Miss Bessie Ravencroft, I see my country dwindling away. It is ludicrous to be destroying our assets and shipping them overseas to be burned for fuel. I have never been an activist my whole life, but now I'm being forced to stand up for my town because of the amount of citizens popping up with heart disease and cancer. I am scared to live here. I cannot understand how the UK is allowing Drax to be here to destroy our way of life, the air we breathe and our health, while citizens in their country are fine. And that is the brutal reality of it. We are here in the UK, it is our energy bills paying for this, but these are the people that are suffering the consequences of Drax's pollution and destruction. And it is with them in mind that we are here to demand no more subsidies, no more funding for this terrible industry that is poisoning people, that is destroying forests, and that is fundamentally making our world a worse place to live. And in some cases, an impossible place to live because you just can't breathe. So thank you all so much for being here today. It is incredibly appreciated. It is vital that we're here, and we're very, 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 very grateful for all of you being here and for all of our wonderful speakers who are not only talking about the injustices of the biomass industry, but how it connects with so many other campaigns, because fundamentally all of these struggles are interlinked, they're united, and when we're united we are so much stronger. So thank you all so much.
Woo!
Yes, I'm part of Money Rebellion. At Money Rebellion we target the financial sector, which bears a huge responsibility in the multiple crises that we are facing. A climate crisis exacerbated by an ecological crisis, but also a huge inequality and democratic crisis, created by the same forces. We try to bring attention to the various offenders Like, for example, Barclays, who, what a coincidence, is also one of the lenders that agreed to extend a 300 million revolving credit facility to Drax until 2025. However, in the case of Drax, the largest financier is actually the British taxpayer. Sorry, I'm looking for my notes. Drax relies heavily on financial supports from various sources, including massive subsidies to the tune of 6 billion until now, but if Drax gets what they want, it can increase to 10 to 11 billion. It's a very expensive method for weaning Britain's power grids of fossil fuels. And the way it's done, it's because as Drax is meant to be producing green electricity, it receives subsidies. It's called a difference contract. So for every unit of electricity that is produced under a certain price, it will get compensation from the UK government. If it goes above that price, it's meant to pay that money out back to the government. What happened in 2022, as we all know, when our energy bills went up, is that actually Drax should have paid back 639 million to the government under that same agreement. The subtlety of the agreement it was only linked to one of their units and not the others. That's where lawyers come in, right? And so what did Drax do? Well, it stopped producing from that unit for most of 2022. And instead, it sold the pellets to the international markets. So let's summarize what happened. When the prices of energy increased and the UK feared not being able to produce enough, Drax, which promotes itself as a provider of energy security in the UK, produced less energy and sold the pellets to the international markets so that it could make more money. Will Baroness, the CEO, his pay package jumped nearly 70% that year to 5.4 million. The finance chief, Andy Skelton, he got a pay package of 3 million, jumping up from 2 million in 2022. So there you are. This is another way of showing how Drax subsidies are wasteful. They receive money claiming they are green, but really they are diverting funds from other more effective, sustainable forms of renewable energy, such as wind and solar, but also, as the previous speaker said, the cheapest energy is the one that you don't use. So yeah, this is why we are here today, to call the attention to Drax lies, to expose Drax harm, and to demand Drax accountability. We are asking them to stop burning wood, to stop lobbying the government, and to stop claiming to be carbon negative. We want the government to stop subsidizing Drax, to stop supporting them, and to stop spreading their lies. We are here to tell the world that Drax is not the solution, it is the problem. Enough is enough. Drax must go.
Robin from Fossil Free London, and at Fossil Free London we disrupt big oil. We disrupt the fossil fuel industry that's wrecking the earth. But look, biofuels are also a major part of what's destroying our right to survive and our opportunities that have been hard fought for over decades. I'll put it like this. We're all here because of a cover-up. This cover-up started back when the first people spoke about climate change, and it was systematically repressed by those people whose product made lots and lots of money from causing that destruction. That cover-up happened when Exxon and Shell and BP knew what damage that the climate crisis would do to our economies, to our society, to our politics, but carried on. And this cover-up continues today, with companies like Drax
claiming that they're the solution while continuing the same extractive mentality and same destruction of ecology and nature that got us in the crisis in the first place. The cover-up today is more pernicious, and it exists in every company. It exists when every destructive company, when Shell puts wind farms on its website, or jumping dogs in its adverts, or when Barclays says that gas is actually green, or with their brand new oil and gas policy that nods towards the need to move away from fossil fuels, continuing to allow the most enormous of loopholes, which is actually still funding Shell and Exxon to the tune of billions of pounds. So I applaud all of you who see the label of renewable, sustainable biofuel and realise, no, this is part of exactly the same cover-up by which the people in power make sure that we are none the wiser as a collective on the destruction that they are wreaking. But that time of our ignorance is over. People know more than ever before about how destructive fossil fuels, biofuels, these dirty energy industries are, and we're rising up against it. And so thank you, all of you, for shining a light on the continuing cover-up, because we will not have our eyes covered any longer, and we will stand against those things that destroy us, because we cannot allow ourselves, our children, one another to lose everything. We will not stand for it, and we have no choice but to win. Thank you.
Whoa!
Is sustainable. So this consultation, which is inviting companies to apply by the end of March for these subsidies, which suggests that they've already made their mind up, is forging ahead when other bits of sort of government and establishment and regulators are trying to put the brakes on and question what's going on. So there's definitely a real key time for, as Jenny Jones said, people to lobby their MPs, because there's things going on inside government, there's conversations happening that are pulling in different directions. So there's a real opportunity for us to pull in the direction that stops the